Great antlers, delicious meat, and incredible emotions on the rutting ground. All of that thanks to the red deer. Welcome to another episode of Eurohunters. The turn of August and September is the ideal time to hunt stags. It's the rut in full swing. This time we decided to take a secret weapon instead of firearms. We will hunt stags with Tomek Maliński, the European champion in the noble art of deer calling. Good morning, Tomek. Good morning. In today's episode, our special guest will hopefully inspire the audience to develop a passion for the wonderful art of wild game calling. Tomek Maliński has won many European deer calling championships as an individual competitor and together with a team. He stood on all three platforms of the podium in countless prestigious tournaments. In the next two episodes, he will share his passion with us and try to show just how much joy and satisfaction one may get from calling these noble animals. Let's go into the woods. We are in Western Pomerania, in my hunting district and my hunting ground. We arrived a bit earlier, around 4 p.m. Now it's already 5:15. First, we need to scout out the land to see if there are any stags in the area. Sure. In my district, they show up earlier than elsewhere. They can go out into the rutting ground as early as a few minutes past 6 in the afternoon. Tomek, we've got a high seat here. Let's climb it. Sure thing. Let's have a view from the top. I'd like you to see what this area looks like, because down there it's like being in a tunnel. As on every normal hunting trip, it's important to scout the area and plan your moves ahead, so that you're not caught by surprise. Przemek told Tomek about the land and its past, then briefly described places where one may spot a deer. There are many quiet corners where stags feel safe and hunters need to walk miles in order to find the one and only target. Tomek is already impressed by the place, and in his imagination he probably sees a beautiful 18 or maybe even a 20-point stag. But it's still quite early, and much smaller individuals are stars of the meadow show, like the fox which passed the high seat without taking any notice of our presence. We're leaving our vantage point and move into the thicket to find traces of deer. See, Tomek? Stags cross this place. You can probably notice it yourself. It's a very good sign that stags dwell in the hunting ground, because you can see damaged bark on trees. They rub the bark with their antlers. When the antlers of stags reach the full size, He begins to rub off the soft external layer of the skin, called velvet. Broken twigs, bark striped off trees wherever you look, and from the appearance of the marks it's easy to say they could have rested here, because it's the kind of place. Certainly it was no young stags that did this, to have a worthy competitor. The smell also tells me that a deer could have stayed here recently. That's possible. Right now, just before the rut, they're in constant flux, so I won't be surprised if we meet one in our way. To avoid going through the thicket, we'll go on the levee. We'll walk along the levee a bit. That way we won't make so much noise, because the right time is coming and we need to exercise more caution. Sure. We're certain that stags live in the area. Places like this, if they are situated on the route of animal migrations towards open spaces, clearings, reed beds, are also great hideouts for young stags. They may also be used to issue a kind of warning for rivals, to show who rules on their territory. It's very important to observe the reed and remain very careful when moving through the high grass, where you're likely to find a bathing pond if you don't want to run into a lying stag. Let's stop for a moment on this path because we're hot after moving through those reeds. Tomek, how does one become a caller anyway? First of all, it's a hobby and a passion. Calling falls within the category of hunting. It's because we listen to the rutting ground every year and try mimic the voices of stags as best as we can. And mind you, there are more than a dozen of different vocalizations. When we reach perfection in imitating the sound, we can talk with stags during the rut and provoke them to approach us. And how did you start as a deer calling talent? I was beaten by the deer calling bug while attending my forestry technical school. So you weren't a hunter back then? No, absolutely not. I wasn't a hunter, but the passion for hunting was already there, and I loved the time of the roar. In my first year at secondary school, I spied on my older schoolmates to see what deer calling was about. Later on, I continued training on my own by walking in the woods during the rut. So the first thing to do is listen, listen and listen. Yeah, that's the key. First, you need to train your ears and acquire knowledge, which allows you to recognize and classify the sounds of a stag. And then, by adapting the sound to the stag you want to call, you provoke him to move in your direction. And nowadays, is it enough to look up some information on the internet? Or would you say that a field training is a must? No, the internet is not enough. You need to spend many long hours in the hunting ground. Every stag grows differently, there's no pattern to it. You can't say that this is how young stags roar and this is how mature ones do it. Because the timbre, tone they use and the emotions they want to express have influence on the modulation of the call. And we have to become masters in recognizing these different vocalizations and match our sound to the stag we want to call. So you adapt to the stag. It's not that you invent something and... No, absolutely not. It's all about making the stags curious and provoking him. It's especially provoking for master stags. We're teasing and taunting him, looking for a quarrel, so that he feels threatened by the rival and starts to fear for his hinds. Now we know how to begin our own adventure with calling, and since time is not on our side, we'll move to the tower blind less than 100 meters away from here. We'll climb it and we'll have a chat about the equipment you use to call stags. Yes, there's no time to spare, let's go. Tomek, I've chosen the meadow for deer calling, but tell me about efficacy. Is it better to call in the woods or on the meadow? A closed space clearly offers higher efficacy and chances. You can be on the move and you're not as visible as in the open. Obviously, you always need to move against the wind. Calling from one location, for instance a tower blind on the meadow, also brings results, but it's less effective than when you're moving through the area. And in general, if you were to pick a number on a scale from 1 to 10, how often do you succeed in luring the stags? Out of 10 stags, how many come to you?
Na 10 byków ile przychodzi?
You never have a 100% success rate with calling. I think it's easier to call bachelor stags. You imitate the voice of master stags and they think that you have hinds. It's easier than calling a master stag. With a master stag, you can't expect him to leave his harem and come to you, and to cross a certain line that marks his sense of safety. In the district where I hunt, this distance is roughly 200 meters. When I call a master stag from a distance bigger than 200 meters, he never comes to me, leaving his herd, because there are bachelor stags all around. But if you're closer than 200 meters, he becomes very anxious for his hinds and takes on the challenge to fight.
Bardzo mocne zagrożenie, oswojowanie i podejmuje wyzwanie do walki.
Gosh, this is really complicated. I've always thought that it's enough to stand somewhere at the edge of the forest with a Triton's conch or other similar device and just start calling. You need to listen to the sounds that the stag makes and he just comes to you. But it's a complicated issue. It's not so simple. I often hear about people who have the same idea. I meet colleagues who start out in calling and they describe what they do in this manner. Yeah, I called it. I imitated the voice of the stag that roared to me, and I was somewhat successful or not, but with every call you need to have a separate strategy. You need to have a different way with bachelor stags and the ones that already have a harem. Wait a minute. I think there was something running in the distance. We may call with the sound of a young searching stag. We are walking and making a bit of noise. If we call like a young searching stag, other deer will think that it's another stag coming and they won't be as cautious and alert. So it calms down the hunting ground a bit. Yes, of course. So maybe let's do that, because we'll be getting closer to the tower blind and we're making so much noise after all. Well, the first pancake is always spoiled, as they say. We'll imitate the first stags on the hunting ground, so that's a very safe sound, the sound of a young stag looking for a hind. It's the beginning of the rat today. Usually the first to roar are young stags. They're so-called supporters. Their role is actually to turn up the heat during the rat. So right now we're doing the vocalization of a young searching stag, and that's enough to calm them down. We can gently... Did you hear that? A stag replied. We've got a stag there. Great! So now we can quietly move towards the tower blind. Unfortunately, we have to speak even more quiet and get to the tower blind. It's 5:40 on the dot. How punctual! And speaking of punctuality, we've just reached the end of our episode. But don't worry, you only have to wait a week to watch new adventures of our European champion on the ratting ground and the beautiful stags. All of that in the next episode of Eurohunters.